Okay, we're going to look at the smoke unit of the MTH SD70M2. Although the smoke unit seems to work fine when the unit starts up, after running it for a little bit, the smoke unit tends to stop. So I'm going to show you how to open up the shell. I'm going to show you how to check the smoke unit itself, and then repack it with a new wick. What we're going to do is we're going to follow the instructions as I've written in page 16, and we're going to take the shell off of the engine itself. Now, if you can look at my engine, I left the foam inserts in so I don't bend the detail pieces. Also, too, on the trucks themselves, there's some pretty fragile pieces, so you have to be really careful when you take this apart. There are 4 screws per truck, or per axle. So, the 2, you can see 2 to the left, and the other 2 are up in the front. You have to rotate the truck to get to them. So there's a total of 8 screws that we need to remove. Okay, once you take off the 4 screws, you'll be able to pop the shell off, which is what I did here. Now, with all MTH products in the Premier line, you've got to watch out for the detail pieces. Look at the flaps here. Look at your horn here. Look at your grates, that sort of thing. So you have to be really careful when you start to do that. The piece that we're going to focus on is going to be this little gold cup. That's your smoke unit. What happens is you add smoke fluid through the top of the unit, through the shell, it drips down, it gets heated up, and it comes back out. Inside this unit, there's a coil, and there's also some sort of wicking. So we're going to pop that open. There's 4 large screws, and we should have an idea of how good or how bad the wicking is. Also, sometimes, I don't know if you can see it or not, there should be a rubber seal between the fan and the unit itself. In this situation, there is some charness on the wick itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the heating element off that char, cut that char out, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so I looked at the wick, and even though the wick generally seems pretty good, the char was in the middle of the wick. So that means I'm going to have a shorter wick to work from. So what I've done is I've used my own wicking. And by my own wicking, basically what I have here is a tiki torch wick. And what I do is I roughly measure the size of the box, cut off a section, open it up, and then drop it in. Now, I don't know if you can really see this or not, but right here, that's where the fan comes in to blow the hot air across, or the air across. As this element is heated, it shoots straight up in the air. So when you re-wick, or you put the tiki torch wick in, you have to make sure there's enough padding to allow for a clean, the air to puff and chuff or just even move across the heating element. Now the next step is you take the coil, the heating coil, and you just kind of measure that in to make sure that it fits nice and snug. You don't want to have it be too tight or too loose, otherwise you won't get any smoke. Now, after you check your wicking and make sure that you're good to go, the next step is to saturate the wicking. Because this is a diesel locomotive, I'm using the MTH diesel fluid. All I do is I drop this in and just saturate the entire wick. And the reason why I saturate here is because when the wick is dry, it burns. So I basically take like 1.5 droppers full and just throw it in there, knowing that that's going to be nice and wet. And then I let it sit for a minute. Okay, you don't want it to be too moist when you put the heating coil back on. Okay, now that the coil is ready to be reattached to the box, what I did was I made sure there's a clear airway, and I moved some of the wicking up so that it makes a connection or it hits the coil itself. Okay, so now that I have the unit open still, I'm going to make sure that my smoke unit is turned on by just rotating the screw or the knob all the way to the right position, or max position. When I go back to put the shell on, I'll drop it down to about halfway. The reason why I don't want it to be on all the way is because this unit runs hot. And the hotter it runs, the quicker it burns out the wick, and then I have to go through this process all again. So right now, this is in the max position. So let's go take this unit without the shell, put it on the tracks, and see if the smoke unit works. Now, if you can hear me, you're getting a steady plume of smoke coming out of the unit. And if you look up, you can really start to see how much smoke's coming off this thing now. And that's all because we have a super saturated TV torch wick inside.
All set to go.
Now before you put the shell back on, you got to be careful of a few different things. The first is called wire management. And what wire management means, that the wires that are in here and all around the smoke unit and around the battery and the engine and the power supply, you have to make sure that that falls within the shell itself. Otherwise what happens is you put the shell on, you pinch it, and then you have to figure out why you don't have any lights or why your sound isn't correct or that sort of thing. So we're going to be very careful when we slide our lights on, our shell on, to make sure that the lights are working and all that stuff is good to go. Now the last and most important part about putting the shell on is making sure that you have the shell in the right place. So in this situation, I really had to make sure that the shell was set and ready to go. Okay, now that I have the shell put back on, what we're going to go do is we're going to throw the engine back on the tracks again to see if the smoke plume looks as good as it did without the shell on it. Now, you got to be careful too. When you add smoke fluid to these units, what happens is you put smoke in the center, and you think that it just goes right down the chute, when in essence what happens is it comes to a little hole, and the hole itself either accepts or doesn't accept the fluid. So now that I've super saturated the wick, I shouldn't have to put a lot of fluid into this, probably for the next 7 to 10 running hours. So don't think you got to throw a whole eyedropper full of fluid into this once you do the wicking method and super saturate it. And there you have it. Massive amounts of smoke.